So the Commission, and when I talk about the Commission, I don't just mean the Inspectorate. I mean the members of the board themselves. They place enormous store on the roles undertaking the compliance function. When they examine matters, they pay particular attention to the way that the AML or nominated compliance officer or the MRO and the DMLRO have conducted themselves. They see these roles as vital to the safety of the sector, and they expect that the work that they produce to be an integral part of each organisation's governance. My board expects your boards to be integrating your contributions into their governance arrangements. We are looking for a compliance culture that emanates from the top and where every element within the organisation understands their role within the AML CFT PF scheme. Cooperation and collaboration have to be the hallmarks of our work as we meet the challenges in our sector. From our side, that's outreach to you in industry, it's the National Risk Appetite Statement, and it's supporting you by issuing clear and reliable guidance and by making forums such as this and the one-to-ones available to you. From your side, that's your professionalism in your approach, it's your experience within the sector, and importantly, it's your feedback to us on what we can do to help you in your role. It's important that our routines and arrangements meet the international standards, and your organisations will be pivotal in that. When our National Risk Assessment is published, two things will become extremely important. First, that you carefully consider the material that we publish and you integrate it into your risk arrangements if necessary. And secondly, that enough time elapses between integrating those controls and the Moneyval evaluation, some of which you'll be involved in personally because Moneyval will want to talk to you as the sector. They will be looking to see if the National Risk Assessment has resulted in changes which has made the sector safer from financial crime. Now, with your indulgence, I shall be sitting in on this session and observing the work of the AML Forum, and I will also be available at the end if you want to talk to me as a group or individually. Before I hand over to Shannon, who's going to take you through the National Risk Appetite Statement, I'd like to say this. We're all in the safety business in this room, and we recognise the roles carry tremendous responsibility in a very demanding environment. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for choosing to work in a compliance role and help to keep our sector safe. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So some of you might recognise me. I've spoken to the forum before. I think it was probably about a year ago now, in my former role in the Cabinet Office. So I have been with the GSC since January. I'm part of the policy and outreach team, and my role is to help the GSC prepare for Moneyval. So today I am here to talk about the National Risk Appetite Statement. Hopefully that will come up on screen. I'm hoping that you have already reviewed the statement, but it's a very important document, so the intention behind going through this today is just to give you an overview and a bit of background as to how it came about, why it's important, and how the sector is to incorporate that within their own risk frameworks. So, what is the National Risk Appetite Statement? It is essentially a national response to risk. So it's a formal statement of the Isle of Man's risk appetite within the e-gaming sector, as well as any other business sectors that may have activity linked to e-gaming. So within your own internal frameworks, you will set your internal risk appetite, but this is it from a jurisdictional level. So this particular statement is focused on e-gaming. A wider national risk appetite statement will be published towards the end of this year, so we're looking at Q4 2024, and the intention is that that will be reviewed on an annual basis. It would also be reviewed at any trigger events, so if there's been a new national risk assessment published, or if there's been a material change to the kind of threat landscape. So the National Risk Appetite Statement for the e-gaming sector has been developed in response to emerging threats from transnational organised crime, particularly in East and Southeast Asia. So you will have seen the UNODC reports, you would have seen kind of news articles about activity within the Isle of Man. So this document has been published in response to those emerging risks. And its purpose is generally to enhance the island's risk mitigation framework. It was developed by government agencies. It also received input from representatives of professional bodies. So before it was published, we had a session with the advisory group who provided some really helpful feedback to make sure that the document was as accessible as possible. And a really important kind of message to convey is that the National Risk Appetite Statement is supported by a Typologies document, which was published by the Financial Intelligence Unit. The risk indicators and the typologies in that document are really key, so those documents need to be considered hand in hand. In terms of our response to risk, that's a really important part of how Moneyval will look at our risk framework. So first and foremost, this is important because it's to protect the integrity of the sector, but obviously we know that we have a future international assessment, and that's a really fundamental aspect of our national risk framework. So from a technical compliance perspective, the FATF standards look at how we respond to identified risks, and it's also looked at from an effectiveness perspective to how well we kind of achieve those outcomes. And those areas have a cascading effect on the wider framework. So how we apply this is really important. And just a final point on that, it applies to all entities undertaking activity in the island. So an important message is that this, whilst it applies to the e-gaming sector, obviously there's other sectors that intersect with gaming, so TCSPs, banking, advocates. So it's a document for that wider audience as opposed to just the sector. So the key messages, oh sorry, I've skipped on, I'm looking at the wrong slide. In terms of why the National Risk Appetite Statement is important, as I said, this is our response to risk in action. So it's an important document in itself, but how we collectively use it is equally as important. It's not a mandatory element of the FATF standards. So the requirement to have a national risk assessment and policies to address those risks is the requirement. It's not explicit that it has to be in the form of a national risk appetite statement, but that's a really effective way to ensure that you have kind of consistency across the sectors and a clear expectation of what we as an island are willing to accept from a risk perspective. And another key reason why it's important is that whilst maintaining international standards and keeping our sectors safe is a key priority for us, we also want to make sure the island is an attractive place to do business, and those two things aren't mutually exclusive, they go hand in hand. As I said, it provides clarity and consistency for industry and the regulators. So from a national perspective, it's important for sectors to understand a regulatory body's appetite to risk and what they're willing to accept. And it helps businesses align their practices within those national priorities. It helps protect the island's reputation and financial integrity. As I said, it signals our commitment to protecting our sectors and ensuring it remains an attractive place to do business. And finally, it helps us disrupt criminal exploitation of legitimate sectors. So having a clear national stance supported by comprehensive typologies and risk indicators, and ensuring that all sectors have good understanding of that is crucial to our protection of the sectors. So as I said, a wider national risk appetite statement will be established later this year, and the intention is that that will be updated on an annual basis. So in terms of the contents of the document itself, I've pulled some kind of key messages from the National Risk Appetite Statement. So firstly, there is limited appetite for business in the e-gaming sector where there is ownership and or control from East or Southeast Asia. So they were the jurisdictions identified by the UNODC, and they are the regions where we've seen these typologies emerging from. And whilst those typologies aren't restricted to those areas, they are of a kind of a clear risk, so enhanced measures would need to be applied. It's not to say that it would be a hard no, but there is limited appetite for acceptance of such business. So if there were license applications where there is ownership and control from East or Southeast Asia, the purpose of this is to set out that there is limited appetite for such business. If it was to be accepted, there would need to be any risks kind of clearly assessed and mitigated. Where there is accumulation of higher risk factors, there's limited appetite within the regulators to grant a license. So the document itself highlights those risk indicators. So hopefully it clearly translates what they are. And then, as I said, along with the typologies document, that gives a picture of what you need to kind of be looking out for and what you need to cascade to your staff to look out for. And finally, if there's accumulation of risk factors present within the same relationship, so in respect of existing business, actions need to be taken. So the document highlights that it's to be classed as a trigger event, and the expectation is that all businesses will review the document, review your internal frameworks, and take any necessary action in response to the risk. So at the heart of the document is a risk-based approach. So any risks would be kind of proportionate to the risks identified. So in terms of what operators need to do, as I said, it is to be treated as a trigger event requiring immediate incorporation into your own risk assessment, risk mitigation frameworks. I'll apologise, I should probably update that slide to include technology risk assessments as well. So reviewing your suite of risk assessments and ensuring that they take the National Risk Appetite Statement into consideration. Hopefully that's something that you've already done or in the process of doing, but this is just a gentle reminder to make sure that you're doing that. Going forward, the inspections team will start inquiring during inspections how the National Risk Appetite Statement has been considered, and it may, if we're kind of looking ahead to our on-site visit from Moneyval, it may be kind of the type of questions that they would be looking to ask operators as well as to how that's been incorporated into frameworks. So reviewing kind of internal policies and procedures, making sure that they are in line with risks identified, so looking at any kind of due diligence checklists that you have. Do you need to review your own internal risk appetite, and making sure that those risk indicators and typologies are clearly communicated to staff so they know what it means, how it's affecting decision making and onboarding and what those risk indicators are to look for. Also looking at any kind of third-party business arrangements, so based on the National Risk Appetite Statement and Typologies document, do they pose a higher risk, and is any action needed to be taken? In terms of risk mitigation, so as I said, applying appropriate mitigating measures where higher risk factors are identified, and avoiding entering into new relationships where risks cannot be effectively mitigated. In terms of ongoing monitoring as well, continuously assessing your business and customer relationships against the National Risk Appetite Statement, and ensuring your internal governance processes reflect it. So, in terms of what the GSC will do, so we've also been reviewing our own internal policies and processes to make sure that they incorporate the contents of the National Risk Appetite Statement. I've touched on licensing decisions and the fact that there is not considerable appetite to accept new business where there is an accumulation of higher risk factors, like operators will also be kind of reviewing our own estate and taking any action if needed, whether that means kind of enhanced due diligence, things like that. So, as I said, supervisory oversight, that will be considered going forward as part of our risk-based supervision, so making sure that the document has been incorporated into your own risk framework. Just to say as well, the GSC AML guidance has been updated to incorporate the National Risk Assessment, so hopefully you will have seen that. There is an FAQ document as well, and the intention is that that's a living document, so if you have any feedback, please do let us know. We've got some Slido questions on the National Risk Appetite Statement, so if there's anything you think needs to be clarified, or anything that you think the sector would benefit from including in that document, please do let us know. Have I just skipped past? Sorry, I don't know what I've done with my notes here. In terms of how this has kind of come about, I think the purpose of talking about collaboration is to explain kind of how we're working together to identify these risks. So I think since these emerging threats have started to materialise, there has been a considerable amount of work about how we collaborate domestically, how we engage with international partners as well. So hopefully that kind of provides the assurance that since threats have materialised, there has been a significant amount of interagency cooperation which has been strengthened considerably, and we can already kind of see the benefits of that in play at the moment. So the kind of strategic and operational levels have been reviewed, so we've reviewed our kind of entire governance framework across government and how we work together, so that involves looking at committees, working groups, and reviewing kind of interagency MOUs, so a lot of them have been reviewed and strengthened, and then we've also had the enactment of the PDO, what's the name of it? Permitted Disclosures Order, yeah. Earlier this year, which has strengthened that, who we can share information with as well amongst government agencies. So there's been a considerable amount of work, and then of course the sector, as Mark said, you have a really key role in protecting the sector and making sure that you identify and assess those risks, report any suspicious activity, and apply proportionate controls. So I've just included this to give you a very brief overview of kind of how the current structure works. I won't go into too much detail because I'm conscious of time, but we've kind of reviewed the entire framework from a strategic level to a kind of cooperative level, and how we engage domestically. Kind of one of the key mechanisms in place is how kind of law enforcement, the regulators and the FIU engage with each other. So that mechanism has been strengthened, and they meet regularly to kind of consider any ongoing matters. So I mentioned that the wider National Risk Appetite Statement will be expected later this year, as will the National Risk Assessment. We welcome any continued engagement with yourselves and any feedback. We'll continuously update the FAQs document as and when, and the GSC guidance. So I suppose I've been the kind of warm-up act for the more interesting side, which is the FIU's presentation. So we've got Callum from the FIU to present on their Typologies document, which again, hopefully you've had a chance to review. And just to emphasise that that's a really kind of key document to consider and make sure that that is cascaded to staff, particularly the kind of risk indicators and what they need to be looking out for. So as I said, there'll be some questions on Slido in respect of the National Risk Appetite Statement. Hopefully that kind of gives you an overview of what's expected. And if you have any questions, please do let us know. And I think I'll hand straight over to Callum. Thank you.
Firstly, I'd just like to thank the GSC for organising and inviting the FIU to speak at this forum. I'm Callum, I'm a senior analyst at the FIU. I also work closely with the Isle of Man Financial Crime Partnership as part of my role. I was previously in an operational role, but I've been in this role since January this year. It's a bit more strategic, it's a bit more outreach, it's a bit more working with you guys. I've worked in the FIU for the past 2.5 years, and I've previously worked in industry in quite a few different sectors. I've prepared a short presentation on e-gaming typologies. But first, as Shannon's kind of mentioned, I'd just like to highlight as a resource the latest typology we've published, which is FIU online gambling, red flags and typologies for money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation financing. It's a bit of a mouthful. A large number of financial sectors were considered when creating this typology document, as ultimately the gambling sector crosses with many other sectors such as banks, corporate service providers, accountants and lawyers. We aim to provide as many hypothetical, useful situations as possible and highlight as many possible potential financial crime risks. Obviously you can't cover everything, but we wanted to give you as much as possible to raise awareness. Some of the scenarios within the document are a bit more basic, but some get a bit more complex. I would encourage you to have a look and share with your AML staff if you haven't already. God, this thing's a bit dangerous. So FIU statistics show a decrease in SAR reporting from the e-gaming sector in 2025. The FIU have received 76 SARs from 16 reporters who hold or have held Isle of Man GSC licenses. The FIU hopes the publication of this typology will lead to an increase in reporting to the FIU. I want to stress the FIU recognises that participants, part of this AML forum, are experts in this field, and our aim is to work with you positively, creating useful products for you and your staff members to decrease financial crime occurrences on the Isle of Man. So I welcome any feedback on this document and will incorporate it into anything we do in the future. As stated in the Isle of Man National Risk Appetite Statement, which has been touched on by Shannon, the e-gaming sector has been subject to infiltration from organised criminal transnational groups originating from Southeast Asia. This is reinforced by open source publications such as the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime reports, highlighting online gaming platforms are at the centre of increasingly complex and sophisticated criminal activity stemming from East and Southeast Asia. This threat's only increasing, with Amnesty International recently publishing a report this year which identified 53 scam compounds carrying out investment scams in Cambodia. The regulated sector and law enforcement agencies remaining vigilant to this threat is key to prevent further exploitation. The FIU continues to act as a central agency in this process. So throughout the SARS we received, the FIUs noted that terrorist financing, proliferation financing risks to all sectors can sometimes be overlooked or missed. Terrorist financing and proliferation financing, although they're rarer, they generally represent a greater risk of potential harm than money laundering. An emerging proliferation financing threat that's being observed around the world, we haven't observed it here, I'd just like to say for context as yet, but it is a threat, is the exploitation of businesses by North Korean state actors who are seeking remote employment as IT workers. The salary they earn is then sent back to Pyongyang to finance North Korea's nuclear weapons program. As a sector that may utilise more remote workers in other countries, this could be a risk for the sector to consider. Spotting these state actors can be tricky, but some possible red flags are limited to no interaction with co-workers, a camera that is turned off or not working in all remote meetings, workload management tools show an excess time logged in and working. So these individuals then install remote working tools to allow other individuals to continue working. So they won't be your worst workers, they'll be your best workers. And they'll continue working for extended periods of time, with some reports identifying some individuals who were working with 3 weeks without stopping. They'll also access key IT infrastructure, which might lead to ransomware attacks or theft of company data, as happened quite recently with the Bybit hack. I don't know if anyone saw that. So I've attached an article that goes into more depth, and I'm happy to share the slides should anyone wish to have them after the presentation. So I've created 2 new typologies for this forum, a B2C and a B2B example. I apologise, the typologies are quite simplistic, but it was just based on time. The exercise is purely to encourage an investigative way of thinking and a detailed consideration of red flags and mitigation. I recognise a real life scenario, you'll probably see fewer red flags and you will have less information to work with. However, usually a comprehensive client review system, effective AML tools and detailed AML frameworks can still take you to the point where you can make an accurate assessment of customer activity and whether the activity is suspicious activity. But you might get lucky. Certainly in my role operationally, I've come across some very silly criminals, so you may get lucky. While the typologies created are fictional, the FIU has received SARs similar to these examples. I'm going to read through the B2C example. I realise it's quite small, so I'm happy to read it out and then we'll move to the red flags. So the first example, customer A opened a gambling account with firm B. Customer A immediately deposited a large amount of funds from a debit card. An internal trigger was hit, requiring additional customer due diligence information before play could continue. Firm B made a request to customer A to provide ID, proof of address, and source of funds information in the form of the debit card used to make the deposits. Customer A was initially evasive, but provided the documents requested. Firm B identified that the ID and address documentation were falsified. Investigation showed IP location information for customer A did not match the address provided. Customer A did not respond when questioned further. Firm B received a chargeback request from the issuer of the debit card stating the card had been stolen. Subsequently, Firm A developed a suspicion that they'd received the proceeds of crime and made a disclosure to the FIU. So in this case, we've got the following red flag indicators. The deposit of a large amount of funds in a short period, reluctance to initially provide CBD and no response to further questions, identification of the falsification of CD documents, IP location did not match the address provided, and receipt of a chargeback and notification payment method had been stolen. So while awareness is great, what can we do to detect and prevent the activity? Some examples in this case you could consider, but you may already use, are tools to detect player deposits in real time and recognise anomalies, particularly with new and dormant accounts. It's also a massive advantage, as I'm sure you guys know, to have staff available to review around the clock, given the 24-hour nature of online gambling. Customer review thresholds and blocks should be in place in line with the risk-based approach. tools and expertise to proactively identify forged documents, tools or persons that can conduct analysis of IP information. So the second example I've got is a B2B relationship, cover all bases. Again, apologies, it's really small. Supplier C is an Isle of Man GSC licensed software supplier. They provided e-gaming software to an international client, Company D, who is based in Thailand. It's really creative with my naming conventions. Company D is a newly incorporated company with local directors / UBOs with limited e-gaming experience. When the software supply agreement was initially signed, Supplier C questioned how Company D were going to afford the fees as they lacked an established player base. Company D stated they were part of a group who would initially fund this but refused to provide detailed documentation when requested. Supplier D noted Company D's website was relatively basic. Supplier C, following the provision of services, identified adverse media stating that Company D was linked through the group company to a criminal organisation engaged in investment scams. Supplier C formed the suspicion he had received the proceeds of the crime in return for the software provided. That should be Supplier C, I've messed up my slide. Supplier C made a disclosure to the FIU and terminated the relationship. So, same thing, red flags in this case. Company D is newly incorporated and has a lack of personal funds to purchase gambling software. Directors and UBOs have limited prior experience in the e-gaming field. This is something we see quite often in B2B relationships. It's almost new directors who have absolutely no relation to the field. It could be any occupation before that. Non-provision of documentation for group companies to potentially disguise source of funds. And then Company D's website is relatively basic and may not be fit for purpose. And then adverse media, linking it to an organised crime group. So again, options to consider for detection and prevention for this example include, but not limited to, EDD being completed for all relevant parties. If there are any concerns or ambiguity with the client's source of funds or source of wealth, non-provision or partial provision should act as a trigger event and the relationship should be reassessed. Consideration should be given to director and UBO experience in the field before providing services. B2B relationships should be regularly screened to identify adverse media as soon as possible. This is probably the most important one. In-depth open source information checks should be conducted on new relationships for all relevant parties, but in the native language if possible. This is important to do if you have the capability, either through a native speaker or technological solutions. The FIU's found adverse media might not exist at all in English, but it will be present in another language, for example in Mandarin. Sometimes this is a real untapped resource when it comes to investigating your client relationships, so I just wanted to highlight it. So the two key takeaways I want to highlight are again the open source checks in the native language. I can't stress it enough. The searches that have been done have provided LEAs with a wealth of information, and the information is freely available to you guys as well. Secondly, I would encourage you all, if you hold information that may assist the FIU with any of its functions, but you don't hold a suspicion, can still be disclosed to us under Section 24 of the FIU Act. Small pieces of information do help identify patterns and trends, and Section 18s have opened and have helped develop criminal investigations and civil recovery investigations in the past. What can seem like a really small piece of information to your company could be a key part of a bigger jigsaw that other agencies are looking at. But hopefully you and your staff can take something away from this presentation when evaluating your current and future client relationships for money laundering, terrorist financing and proliferation financing risk. I don't know, are we doing slide questions later?
We've got one for you, so I thought we could
Lovely,
do that.
yeah, I'm happy to answer any further questions now.
I don't know if you've got the statistics on hand, but it says e-gaming SARS. What was the percentage of quality SARS? Did the others receive feedback on how to improve, fields to check more, etc.?
So currently we've got a feedback system which we give on most SARS. We don't give them on every SARS. Some SARS they're not actionable by us, so they might automatically be filed. But any SAR that's been actioned will receive feedback, and it's over 7 categories. I believe the categories are available on Themis guidance, and they'll fully explain what they mean. So whatever score you get, it'll be a yes or a no, and then you'll get a score out of 10. So anything usually above an 8 is quite high. I think the sector as a whole, I don't have it to hand, but I think the sector as a whole, the average is about 8.7 across all of the feedback we've given.
I can support that as well. I'm doing the National Risk Assessment piece of work at the moment, and we've looked at the feedback and the quality of SARS, and it's predominantly pretty good across the e-gaming sector. So the feedback scores are pretty good.
I think the biggest thing, which is not just the e-gaming sector, it's all sectors, is usually around consent requests. So usually information will be missing that we need to action it, or there won't be an invoice attached, or things like that. So that's an area of improvement, I'd say, for every sector, not just the e-gaming sector. But we are looking at producing more guidance for that in form of video, so that should hopefully be coming out in the next couple of months. I say hopefully as I'm the one doing it, so we'll see. But yeah, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to shout them out if you've got any. No?
Be safe, yeah. There's a couple of other questions, guys, but we'll deal with those at the end of the presentation. It's okay.
I've just got one
Yes, of course.
question, Karen. Thank you very much. That's very insightful. What effect has the National Risk Appetite Statement had on the FRU's work?
So I think, without saying too much, we were maybe a little bit ahead of everyone else when recognising certain threats. So we've now made changes to our processes, particularly with technological solutions that we're looking at getting to kind of implement our investigative tools,
Right.
sort of detailed around specifically this threat and other threats. So it has changed a little bit, but our processes were relatively in line beforehand.
By nature of your duties, you're ahead of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much.
But yeah, if anyone's got any feedback, I'd love to receive it. This is only my second presentation I've done, so any feedback is welcome. You can go on the QR code, or I'll send out a presentation after. Thank you.
Okay, so for the outreach presentation, I'm going to cover how we use data, what we've generally been up to, and some stuff that we're going to do or hoping to do later as well. So, all data that we collect, we surprisingly use. So, we use data from STRICS, inspections, enforcement cases, drop-ins, international and national reports, and more as well, including any feedback that we get in person or on the phone or via email. So, data collected from operator feedback like surveys, phone calls, emails or discussions, and external reports inform what outreach we conduct. So this is your guidance updates, reports and publications, and then the outreach team also use data from inspections and enforcement to establish which topics we think will require more outreach because they don't seem as clear. So, data that can be made public is shared to the industry via our website, email and social media. So this is the outreach survey reports like the ones that we do here, and this is also the enforcement public statements as well. Things that can't be shared publicly, we then use internally. So that is put into Power BI, such as STRICS inspections data, and that's turned into dashboards for staff to use. So in the last 6 months or so, Phoebe from our outreach team worked on getting Power BI reporting project underway in collaboration with people from the FSA. The idea is to use Power BI for reporting within the organisation to help us use data more effectively in our decision making. That project was split into 3 stages: modelling, visualisation and sharing. So at the modelling stage, data from a few different sources is merged and formatted to make it easier to analyse. At the visualisation stage, reports, figures and tables are created, and then finally, custom dashboards are created, which are shared with inspectors, senior management and more. So this has allowed for each division to access the data that's most useful to them. There is also some thought into potentially making some data public, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. That's more of a hope and a doing. So I'll just go over a quick recap of what we've been up to as well. So since January, the webinar video series we've been doing has now been completed. Training sessions were undertaken with the banking sector. We've already done 1, and a second was scheduled for a couple of weeks ago, but for some unforeseen circumstances that's had to move, but that's coming soon as well. The idea is to familiarise banks with the sector and how we supervise as well.
We've also created fact sheets and released them on MLTFPF, flags and typologies. We've released more reports and more news blogs and overhauled the website in general. Drop-in sessions were undertaken in February. Internal training for GSC staff on various topics, including the NRAS, were also undertaken. And I've also gone through and just spruced up bits of the guidance and templates, so hopefully they're a little bit more clear. And additionally, if anyone has any feedback on how things look, then that can go to me or to the outreach team as well. I think there's also a question in the Slido about that. Any Q&A questions, please forward them over. And then what we're hoping to do in 2025 to 2026 is to continue providing both digital and in-person outreach. Some of these are TBC and we don't have dates on them exactly. So if there's something that you are interested in, please do provide feedback or ask us some questions. So we're hoping to do another webinar video series on topics that you're interested in. So again, if there's something that you feel we weren't covering enough or you would like to see that we haven't done, please feedback to us on that. We're also going to host a second set of drop-in sessions in September. The first session was oversubscribed, so we're hoping to do some more, but in a slightly different way this time. We're doing sessions over a few days, and each day has a topic. For example, on Wednesday it might be SARS only or something like that. This means that we can allocate different staff to different topics, so we don't have the same person covering all of them, because we found that that was a little bit of a problem. And it also means that if you have questions on something specific, then you get specific answers that they've been able to prep for. I think I'm also going to maybe go to some other teams as well, so if you have questions for people who aren't in the AML team, we maybe might allocate a day for them as well. We also plan to host some events, or an event at least, aimed at C-level or directors. This is just to raise understanding of what the GSC expects as well. We're looking to do more in-person workshops. Again, topics are TBC on that because we're just looking for feedback from everybody. And I'll also look at what we got from here and what we've just got data internally. We continue to revise the website and publications for consistency and clarity based on feedback, as it's much improved but still a work in progress. And as I said, we're doing more outreach to banking and law sectors to raise awareness of the sector and generally boost some more understanding of what we do. So like I said, we're doing a second banking outreach session. The first one was postponed, so we're doing that again. We're also hoping to do a series of talks with the Law Society in the 2025 to 2026 period. This is depending on their schedule, but the idea is we did one last year with the enforcement team and that went down really well. So again, we're just trying to give them more of an impression of what the GSC does and what to expect from the sector. Other events that are worth mentioning are obviously drop-in sessions and workshops, as well as the Countering Financial Crime Conference. And this time we are having a little bit more input into that as well. So instead of just attending, we're going to be there with some clipboards and greeting people and getting more involved in the organisation. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say what topics they're doing, but they sound good. So hopefully that's a good enough endorsement. Like I said, all the feedback that we get, we do use. So if there's anything that you have a problem with or a suggestion about, or positive feedback is great too, please, then just let us know in the Q&A or send us an email. And I'll pass it over to you guys.
Morning everyone. Quick introduction, my name's Tommy Corlett and I'm a Senior Inspector at the GSC in the AML CFT Inspections team, and I'm joined by Paul, again a Senior Inspector in the AML CFT Inspections team. This morning Paul and I are going to talk through the software supplier license from an AML CFT point of view, and the reason for choosing this topic was a result of the drop-in sessions that we did in February. There was a common theme coming out of the drop-in sessions was questions about how the software supplier licensing inspection goes, so today we're going to cover the following points. Paul is going to have a talk through the legal basis of conducting an AML CFT inspection and the legislation that a software supplier must adhere to. I'm going to go through the AML CFT inspection from start to finish, some red flags and typologies, and we'll talk through a case study as well, just a slightly different one from Callum's earlier. And Paul will finish off by talking about the National Risk Appetite Statement, and just some of the questions that the AML CFT inspections team will be asking during our on-site inspections. And I've just put a list of references there as well on the side, and they're just some materials that we've used to collate information today, but I'm sure you'll be all very familiar with them and they can be found on our website.
Thanks, Tommy. So a few words from me on our legal basis. I appreciate this is a dry subject, so please bear with me. As the holders of an inaugural license for software supply, or as we say, SSL for short, an operator will still be inspected in line with the GSC's risk-based approach. As we know, however, unlike the B2C and network license counterparts, SSL operators are not bound by the requirements of the AML code. This does not, however, mean there's no requirement or expectations of an SSL operator to have or apply AML controls to maintain the reputation of the sector. So, how does the GSC as a regulator ensure that its supervision aligns with its core values, protecting the online gambling industry? When issued with an inaugural license, exclusively for offering software supply, specific conditions are imposed on that license. The key conditions to note in building good business practice and a culture of compliance are as follows. Schedule 5, whereby knowledge or suspicion of money laundering, terrorist financing, or any information on unusual activity must be disclosed to the FIU. This imposes a reporting requirement and the need for an SSL operator to have effective policies and procedures in order to detect MLTF or unusual activity and then make a relevant external disclosure. Secondly, Schedule 2, Part 18, operators with business-to-business relationships with non-Alaman regulated entities should use best endeavours to adhere to the key principles, notably keeping the gambling industry crime-free. This condition imposes a need for a risk-based onboarding of customers and suppliers of the software sector. So lastly, Schedule 2, Part 19 states operators shall not bring the island or its reputation into disrepute, either through itself or relationships with third parties. Again, imposing a need for a risk-based level of due diligence, screening of customers and suppliers alike for the software sector, both at onboarding and an ongoing basis. So how can the inspector review if these requirements have been met? That's by Section 16 of OGRA, which permits an authorised person, i.e. the GSC's inspectorate, to conduct inspections by the production of documents, access to premises and systems used in connection with online gambling, and also the persons operating those systems. It's via the inspection and review of these documents, policies and procedures against these licence conditions and relevant guidance that compliance is tested and the regulatory objectives of the Gambling Supervision Act are met, which leads me to Tommy guiding you through our software inspection process.
Okay, just a quick whistle-stop tour through the scheduling process for a software supplier, and it's not too dissimilar to the full network licensed operators, which many of you in here will be used to. Our AML CFT officer will reach out to you with a proposed inspection date, so that's Nadine over there, give us a wave. Yeah. The GSC would expect at least one director, designated official or operations manager and the nominated AML CFT officer to be in attendance, and ideally this would be in attendance on site. However, remote access is available as an option if necessary. And the inspection will take place at the registered office of the operator. Where the software supplier inspection differs slightly is in the pre-inspection materials. We will request a completed software supplier self-assessment, and we'll also request a list of third parties that you're engaged with. And once we've received that list of third parties, we will take a review and ask for a document pack of one, maybe two of the third parties. And the reason for this is that we want to know how much you know about your third parties, and ultimately if it's in line with your own AML CFT policies and procedures. Whilst on site, we will cover the following sections. We will be looking at the risk-based approach, so we'll be looking at the BRA, any TRAs, and third-party risk assessments. We'll be having a chat to the AML staff, so AML focus questions will be at the nominated AML CFT officer. Suspicious activity reporting as well. We'll be looking at FEMIS access and your policies and procedures relating to internal and external disclosures. And staff vetting and training, so we'll be asking questions on how the software supplier vet and train their staff in AML. Post-inspection, again, does not really differ from the full network services operator inspections in that once the on-site inspection has been completed, the inspectorate will ask for any outstanding documents, and then we'll work on issuing the draft and final reports. Okay, so as promised, the next topic we'll talk through is some red flags. And I've taken this from the FIU report on red flags and typologies for money laundering and terrorist financing, and you can find that report on our website, but I assume it'll be on Callum's website. Yeah. I'm not going to go through each risk factor on screen, but I will just talk about some of the risk factors that the AML inspections team will look at whilst conducting the pre-inspection and during the on-site inspection as well. So we will do open source research into the third parties that a software supplier is engaged with. And this is from an adverse media point of view, or an example will be online presence point of view as well. And this is to see if it falls in line with what the operator knows about the third party. We'll also be looking closely at business structures and obvious links to any countries listed within the National Risk Appetite Statement. And if it does, what measures are put in place to mitigate any risks. We'll be looking at B2B relationships with any operators in unregulated or under-regulated jurisdictions. And to repeat, any measures, we'll be looking at any measures to mitigate any risks if that was the case. And finally, we would also be looking at any B2B relationships where invoices are paid in cryptocurrency. And again, if so, the inspectorate will be looking at measures put in place to mitigate any risks of cryptocurrency as well. And this leads quite nicely into a case study that I've stolen from the FIU typology report, where there's an example given where red flags are in play. And I'll just talk through it today. An Isle of Man CSP was approached by an Isle of Man registered company called Brown Firm. Brown Firm wanted the CSP's help in applying for an OGRA software supply license. And in the course of reviewing the Brown Firm's business proposal, a number of red flags became apparent to the CSP. Brown Firm appeared to be part of a wider group of companies with a complex structure which spanned multiple high-risk jurisdictions. The ownership of the other companies in the group were difficult to determine, and the commercial rationale for the B2B relationship between them were unclear. Furthermore, although Brown Firm described themselves as a cutting-edge gambling software development company, they had a very limited online presence, and their website was very simple and was lacking in content. Brown Firm's directors were pushy with the CSP about the speed of the application, and they did not cooperate readily when the CSP requested further information to clarify points of concern. And ultimately, this led to the CSP declining Brown Firm's business and submitting a SAR to the FIU. So just to go through some of the red flags in the case study, and I think some of them are on screen already, but the use of complex structures, something to keep an eye out for, high-risk jurisdictions in play, opaque beneficial ownership, unclear commercial rationale, unsophisticated gaming website with limited functionality, and the customer behaviour as well. I do accept that some of these red flags on their own does not necessarily mean something untoward is going on, but when multiple high-risk factors are being identified, it should trigger some of the spider senses amongst the CSP or amongst you guys, and that was the case in this case study.
So, as Shannon discussed earlier this morning, with the publication of the National Risk Appetite Statement, this was a trigger event to the sector. When documents like this are issued, whether by the Isle of Man government or the competent authorities alike, operators should consider the risk-based approach accordingly. As the statement has been released in response to emerging risks posed from complex criminal landscape in East and Southeast Asia, the AML inspectors will pay particular attention to these areas connected to this highlighted threat. So, for example, the recent NRAS would warrant a review of operators' items such as your business risk assessment. Has the jurisdictional risk for yourselves now changed for your business? Do your current or imminent third-party engagements pose a greater vulnerability to ML, TF or PF abuse? Are your third-party risk assessments giving enough weight to the right risks posed? Is the level of due diligence undertaken on your contractual relationships still now proportionate? Or are further checks now needed, such as EDD reports, OSINT and adverse media screening and sanctions checks? And what technologies are you using? Can they identify software product use in areas highlighted now as posing a higher risk? A question will commonly be asked in regard to inspections is, what is enough? Where should we draw the line? We're in a chain of supply, and how far are we expected to go? This is a very good question, but not one with a single answer. A word I mentioned before was proportion, and I think that is key. An operator is expected to take a risk-based and proportionate approach with due diligence, checks, screening, etc. should be undertaken to a level suitable to the risk posed to your businesses. From discussions with you recently in consultation sessions, it's very encouraging to see the technology and processes that you already do utilise. And the question will be for your businesses, do they deliver confidence in the integrity and transparency of your customers and suppliers? As always, the AML Inspectorate welcome questions and queries from you. And whilst forums are 6 months apart and feel much closer together from myself and Tommy, we encourage open communication from email, phone and face-to-face. We'll be opening invitations to further drop-in sessions with the AML team in September, so please do get in touch with any specific areas that you want to raise with us and have a chat about. Thanks very much.